I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Vengreso, and we are the creators of FlyMessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Korn Ferry. Korn Ferry integrates their consultancy, Miller Heiman sales methodology, and technology to bring you Korn Ferry Sell for Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics 365. Learn more at kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And today I'm bringing you a little bit of a twist. I'm bringing you a marketing maven to talk to us sales leaders, enablement leaders, sales reps, and of course, all my marketers that are out there listening into the Modern Selling Podcast as well. I'm excited to have Camela Thompson. She is the go-to-market maven at Caliber Mind. Camela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited to have you here with us. So thanks for joining us. And for those of you that have been listening to my show, if I cough, I just want you to know this is the 6-week-long cough that won't go away. So I'm going to try to mute myself as much as possible to make sure I don't cough in your guys' ear, but it might come out. And I think I'm now to the point where I can mute myself before the cough comes. But that having been said, Camela, do me a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about Caliber Mind, and then I've got a very special question I want to ask you.
Wonderful. So I have an odd background for a marketer. My first 15 years were in revenue operations and B2B, SaaS, startups, mature companies, all across the board. And then I had a major career change, went into content marketing, and then was the VP of marketing at Caliber Mind. And now I am focused on all of the go-to-market functions there. So I've done sales enablement, sales engineering, you name it, I've probably had my hands in it.
Fantastic. So you've got a little bit of background then in marketing, I would argue. Yeah. Excellent. And now when you say you're going to dabble a little bit in all areas, tease that out. What does that mean? What's your focus?
So at Caliber Mind, they do, excuse me, we're going to have to, allergy season. So should have given the warning too. So at Caliber Mind, we help marketers make sense of their data. So we connect to all of the data and then we provide them with different analytics. And because of my background and because I am their target audience, I am really involved in product development, working with customers to make sure they're getting the most out of their information. And where we found a serious gap in the market is between getting the numbers and interpreting them into next steps. And that's kind of my specialty. So my boss noticed that, the CEO, and he's like, well, we're just going to sprinkle you a little bit everywhere. It's like, sure, I'm game.
I love it. Well done. Congratulations on that new role. So as customary, I always ask all my guests a very interesting question at the beginning of the show. And that is, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles.
All right. So some genius decided to import dingoes into the Lewiston, Idaho area, and I accidentally became the proud owner of one of those byproducts. And he was a mess, but to this day, he was my favorite dog because he was so smart. He'd honk the car horn, he'd raid the kitchen, he'd open the refrigerator. He was a mess. So yes, I had a dingo.
Wow. Okay. So, and that is the Australian dog.
Yes. Yeah. And I would not recommend because he was spooky around people, great with animals for some reason. But yeah, he never warmed up to more than 3 or 4 people.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Still around today?
No, this was several years ago. And now I have another mess. I just like difficult projects when it comes to animals. Sometimes go to market motions. I like the hard stuff.
Yeah, it keeps us thinking. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. And tell us a little bit about Caliber Mind. I didn't get much details on Caliber Mind there.
Yeah, it's an interesting product. So I think a lot of B2C marketers are familiar with the concept of a customer data platform. And what that does is it connects to all of your systems and then creates this golden record for people. And then we also do that for accounts and then create this nice timeline of interactions with your brand. And that allows you to do a ton of things like attribution, funnel reporting, and engagement scoring to see who's surging in those accounts.
Fantastic. Great. Well, let's take some time to sit and chat about sales and marketing. Yeah, you've got some depth there. You've been spending some time there, obviously, and you spend time on the sales side, the enablement side, marketing. So we always talk about this. What's the word I'm looking for? Friction between sales and marketing. Yeah, between the sales leadership and marketing leadership. Sales says marketing sucks. Marketing says sales never does what follows up on anything. So this is the constant battle. I don't think I've heard any organization that has ever talked well about the other department.
Mhm.
It's very, very rare. But what do you think is at the heart of the friction between sales and marketing in B2B?
Oh boy. So there's a few key things happening here from a psychological and then practical perspective. So, first of all, I see too many organizations still giving marketing and sales different goals. So, when you give the marketing team a volume goal, we need X number of leads. I even struggle with this internally. Early on in a company, we have to give lead volume because that's what we can measure. And if we're not careful to also put a qualitative spin on that, even the best marketers who are very ambitious, they want to hit their numbers, they're not always going to use the best judgment when it comes to what tactics they're using and how they're targeting. Another really common source of friction is that a lot of marketing tactics are long term plays. And sometimes we lose sight as marketers on the fact that we need to continuously feed our sales team. There has to be a mix of long and short term plays so that sales continues to be happy and we're building that go to market motion that we have always dreamed of. And then finally, I see a lot of leadership in B2B. Traditionally, it's been a sales led growth. And we're focused on hiring, what's your quota? Okay, that's how many sales team I need to bring in to hit that number because we're used to cold prospecting and brute force just working. And it doesn't work that way anymore because so many customers are out there wanting that self-service PLG approach. So we're seeing changes in the market. I don't think that most businesses have caught up yet. And then finally, marketing is dealing in massive amounts of transactions and they're interacting with many people at the company if they're doing their job right. And that's hard to measure. So it's really easy when something's going wrong and go to market to turn and blame something that's really subjective, like messaging, instead of taking a hard look at the product, the sales team, and then the individual tactics that we're doing in marketing. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's what I've noticed in most organizations.
It's funny. I was recently talking to an investor. As you know, we are doing venture capital fundraising right now
Mhm.
as a result of Vengreso converting from a service company into a software company with Fly Message. And with Fly Message, it's all about, we've done some really great things. In fact, for us, we have surpassed the then number 4 player in the market who received $7.5 million in funding as compared to our measly $200,000 worth of friends and family funding. We surpassed them, right?
Yeah.
And so I was talking to a venture capitalist and he says, well, if you look at all the marketing things you're going to be doing in your marketing plan, which is the one that is actually driving the most number of activations right now? And I said, well, that's a really hard question to answer. And he says, well, it shouldn't be that hard. And I said, no, it really is. And so I said, first, we know that some of them are coming in from the Chrome store. Well, he's like, well, why? And I'm like, well, that's because we've SEO optimized it. Let me show you. And I showed him how we SEO optimized the tags on the Chrome store and on the Edge store. And he's like, wow, I didn't know that could be SEO optimized. I said, yes, it can. And I said, and look who's popping up. None of our competitors except this one and us. And so he's like, so that's why you're being found. I said, that's half the reason. He's like, well, what percentage? And I'm like, well, it's hard to estimate because Chrome and Microsoft does not pass us back over the link that tells us where the source is. So unfortunately, we can't make attribution, but we do know that we had about a couple hundred before we opened up the messaging. And then afterwards, when we evangelized and socialized between me and my co-founder as influencers, we began doubling that, right? Okay, so any case, so he said, well, if you look at all these things, what's the one marketing tactic that's going to create the most number of activations? And I said, well, that's not how marketing works.
No, it's not. No, and this is something I run into over and over again. It's There's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of tactics, and unfortunately, a lot of the things that work best are hard to measure. And this is coming from an attribution company. And one of the things I made the CEO promise me when I came onto the company is that he had to embrace talking about what is attributable and what isn't very honestly, because that's why a lot of people love to hate attribution, these unrealistic expectations that digital means trackable. And as you just illustrated, not always the case. So we have to work very hard to be where our buyers are. And that's not just in one spot. So yeah, I get the same. What I want you to focus on one or two things, and we're going to get really good at that. And that's going to scale the business. Sorry, that will never work.
Well, and that's exactly the point that I made is I
Yeah.
could have somebody in my email marketing list, and that person came in 7 years ago.
Yep.
And 7 years ago, they saw a webinar and they've been on our marketing list for eons. And then I produce another webinar. And on that new webinar, they maybe join, maybe I do an email marketing newsletter, or maybe John Smith refers them, or maybe they see a social post, or maybe and it's like, so what is the one item? It's not the one item, it's
No.
what's the word I'm looking for? The culmination
Yes.
of many things that you do. And I wish I could say in marketing, there's one thing that will move the lever. Now, there are some things that will there are one thing, single item things that you can do to bring traffic. Like you could do advertisement, like you could do SEO optimization and kill the backlinks and just drive those backlinks so you can bring more traffic. Yeah. And those things can make an impact. You could also do some stellar content marketing that will drive live organic traffic. But now what happens when they get to the site, right? Now, how do you
Absolutely.
convert them? So there's so many moving parts. And I think that's one of the challenges that I'd love you to comment on, Camela, is sales people and sales leaders, in my opinion, I'm one of them,
Mhm.
are very linear. If I
Yeah.
make a cold call, if I then do a follow-on email, if I then do a LinkedIn connection request, if I then do a video message, and I do that a total of anywhere between 13 to 16 times to reach out to my buyer, I will get a response,
Mhm.
bad or good.
Mhm.
And marketing is actually very similar. I'm actually looking at doing 10, 20 different things maybe. And I'd like you to comment on, but some of these things are so complex. Why is it that sales doesn't understand it? And why is it that marketing has such a hard time being able to have KPIs?
Oh boy, that's a lot to unpack. But let's kind of start with the KPI issue, and then we'll back into how we can better align marketing and sales to get sales to kind of be on board and understand how this works. So the KPI piece, there's a couple things going on here that make it difficult. One is all of the systems and places that we can and can't track that we need to bring together into some kind of timeline, and then realize that we're still not going to capture everything. So one of the most important things about um, marketing is building that word of mouth. And fortunately, we don't have the chip in everybody's brain to be able to track when they meet up with another parent at the playground and find out they do the same job and start recommending whatever you do. So it's hard, but it's not impossible. So what I've noticed at Caliber Mind, we use our own technology. I am able to pull up an example account where sales feels that they are the only one who is interacting with them. They sourced it. It was their linear journey, and show actually they had 247 touches with marketing in the 2 years before you ever talked to them. And they did this, 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 and this that we can see right before they reached out to you. So being able to pull up example accounts and show the executive teams exactly how messy and spaghetti-like these buyer journeys are is really helpful in setting the tone. The other thing that's hurting us and preventing some marketers from getting there is, there's a lot of stigmas with creative minds not being able to handle math. And I think a lot of marketers get a bit scared of the numbers. They're honestly really comfortable with ambiguity because they're coming from places like television advertising, PR, and these things you can't measure. So there's too much comfort with ambiguity, and we're not building the skills to be able to speak like the rest of the business. And we're not registering how the rest of the business is focused around these single point KPIs and very good at repetitively showing them. So I think it's a combination of it's hard to do, and too many marketers accidentally shoot themselves in the foot by changing what they're reporting every single quarter, focusing too much on initiatives, and there's a lack of education in the market, like a lack of certifications, programs for marketers to ramp up and understand how they can leverage their data to take them to the next level.
So how should sales hold marketing accountable in? What should we look for? What's the
Well,
KPI?
I think if marketing can also hold sales accountable, because you mentioned earlier the same story we all hear, marketing leads suck, sales never follows up with them. Usually both of those things are true. So we need to start looking more at conversion rates in the funnel. So marketing leads converting into opportunities. Marketers can use that data if they layer in campaign types and some other data to really figure out what's working at that stage, how to ramp it up, and identify system gaps. I can't tell you how many companies their contact us form just went to nowhere, and that's like burning money in the parking lot. So I would focus more on conversion rates and figuring out how both teams can collaborate to improve those rates. And then I would also hold marketing accountable for pipeline and revenue. So marketers need to start really paying attention to, I can't believe how many people don't do this, but paying attention to pipeline and bookings to goal. Because when a marketer goes in feeling really good that their lead volume is great and they had no idea, excuse me, when marketing goes into a meeting and they talk about hitting their numbers and sales miss theirs, they miss the point. We need to start as a marketing organization holding ourselves accountable for the top line number as well and being on top of it all the time so we don't come in looking like we're tone deaf. This also allows us to react to a number and help sales before the quarter is over. Too many marketers look at their data every quarter. That's too late. If you start looking at the same numbers, pipeline and bookings, week over week, you can start noticing, oh crap, we're in week 2 of the quarter and we're already behind pace. If you can start doing that, your conversation in the board and with your sales team is going to have a completely different, frictionless tone. Got a little feisty there.
So sales working better with marketing and vice versa. What's the secret?
You have to communicate. So if I as a marketer see a problem, let's say my conversion rates are going down, the first place I need to inspect and fix is what I can control. I need to remove all friction from the selling process. So I need to figure out, was there a change in the market? Do I need to start moving up higher in the organization? Do I need to change my messaging? Do I need to fix some system issues? Once all of those are addressed, then you go to the sales team. You don't go straight to the CEO. You go to the sales team and say, look, I've done this, and this, and I'm still seeing these problems. Can we take a look before you go take a look? at how long it's taking people to follow up, whether or not they're following up. Before you start pointing fingers, remember three are pointing back at you every time you point your finger at somebody else. Fix what's in your house and then communicate, communicate, communicate. And then once you do communicate, if you get feedback, you need to communicate back how you use that feedback to improve things. That's the only way to collaborate, is to make sure there's always this feedback loop. I see too many people working in silos. The other thing that marketers can do to win over sales is really start collaborating on the actual sales process. So we need to be, if sales doesn't want to invite us into the calls, we need to get access to recordings. We need to hear the words our customers are actually using, and we need to be better partners to sales. So if you start hearing the same objections coming up over and over again, that's a great excuse to start creating some killer content. So I just think there's a lot of ways we can collaborate. It's going to take communication. It's going to take empathy. I think that's another thing where we need to understand that salespeople are motivated to hit their number and bring in an income for their family. They have a very short-term focus. We need to be supportive of that. So if we can prove that we're doing short-term tactics and long-term plays, that also is a huge help.
Gotcha. Yeah. I've always had this thought in my mind, and I think the compensation plans are misaligned for sales and marketing.
Absolutely.
I'm 100% in agreement that salespeople should be quota and base salary. Usually those plans look like 50% and 50%, 50% base salary, 50% commissionable income, or a 60-40 plan, 60% base salary, 40% commission. So I'm a big believer in that, because that incentivizes the behavior that the company wants, which is to do the right things, to work with customers and service them and close them. I'm also a big believer that marketers are, their pay is misaligned as well.
Yeah.
And if you look at every marketer in the organization, they pretty much make a base salary. And if they do have a bonus program, it's negligible. And likely it only sits at the CMO or head of marketing level, which is a roughly no more than 20% variable compensation. But the base salary is a huge honking base salary that they can easily live off of, especially in New York or San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I do believe that those are misaligned. I believe that marketers should have 30% minimum of their compensation. That's down to the content marketer, that's down to the digital marketer, that's down to the social media manager. I believe that it's misaligned. And if we did that, then we could change behavior in terms of thinking about how we're going to drive leads that lead to pipeline. To your point, you talked about pipeline to revenue, right? So I'd love to get your reaction to my philosophy and get your feedback on that.
So I absolutely agree at the executive level. I start to get twitchy and disagree with certain positions below that. So maybe your digital marketer, that makes sense because they actually have a lot of control over who they can target, who they don't target. And then that really determines what kind of mix is going over to sales. I would not do that to a content marketer. Their salaries are already so low. And there's only so much they can control. It's really the job of management, who should have that variable salary that's meaningful, to drive the strategy. And the way they can do that is through performance reviews. And if I have a content marketer who's not focused on the right content, that's the manager's job. That's their miss. So if they aren't aligning with sales and understanding what sales is starving for in terms of content and what would help them propel deals forward, that's management. So I agree with you to a point. Yeah, like I said, there are certain positions, salary so low as it is, and they can only control so much. It's really up to their management team to make sure that strategies are aligned across the entire organization. And I don't mean just the marketing department.
Fair. And of course, we could have arm wrestling contests over this quite extensively.
Oh,
But
yeah.
here's what I also know is that in times past, we've had many content marketers that have written content on our website that performed absolutely with no benefit whatsoever to the organization.
Mhm.
And then when you actually use best practices for content marketing, which is the right, H1s, H2s, which are the headers for those salespeople thinking about that, the subtitles, with the right number of words, with the right number of graphics, with the right video incorporation. When you actually do those things, you have the possibility, depending on the site, right?
Yep.
Because there's also site ranking as well, domain authority, but depending on that site, you actually have the opportunity to be able to make impact. And I would argue that there's more pieces of content out there that are on blogs that suck than there are that don't suck.
I completely agree with you. However, that shows a lack of understanding on the management team of what they should and should not be optimizing against and what they can and can't do.
I got not everything falls on the manager account.
I sure, but
Topical interest, there should be agreement, but execution, that's down at the individual level.
But I think you're seeing people suffering from the same problem we suffer from when we hire really fresh BDRs. A lot of times people are going for the cheapest content they can get. They don't understand how it needs to be folded into their strategy. I would argue that absolutely is a management issue. So if we get the directive that we need to hire the cheapest resources out there and we don't work to coach them, that's on the company. That's short-sightedness on the side of the marketing management team. I guess we agree to disagree.
Yeah. No, listen, I whether you're a cheap resource or not, it's kind of like when I was in my old days as a BDR, then we were called telemarketers. Yeah. And back in 1997 and 1998 is when I started. And so in that particular regard, one of the big challenges that we had was learning to level our skill up. And I think that's where we as an individual have to level up, but also management has to level up too. So to your point, I do agree with you. There's a double-sided component there, whether you're a BDR, whether you're a content marketer. But nonetheless, we do agree on this. Data points that both teams need to look at, and they need to agree, and they need to measure. And that is conversion rates and then the pipeline to revenue ratio. Those are the two things that you talked about in terms of being on the same page. But I want to ask you, how many times are you sitting down with your sales leader and you're saying, pull out your pipeline, and he's saying, pull out your pipeline, and let's compare numbers and let's see where we're at?
Weekly.
How does that happen?
Weekly.
And that's what's missing, I think, oftentimes.
Yeah,
right?
I would agree.
Many sales leaders, especially the larger the organization, you're not sitting down looking at that data. You're just in the throes of whatever's in my sales pipeline is what I'm focused on.
Yep.
And that's one of the big disconnects, in my opinion, is that communication, to what you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely agree. And in the smaller organizations, I also see this, like you said, a really myopic focus on the sales management side on what we're bringing in this quarter. And I understand the mindset. It's marketing's job, and this is where some of the friction comes from naturally. It's marketing's job to make sure that we're aligning ourselves to be successful next quarter and the quarter after that. So I've noticed we always joke we're the yin to their yang. It's really necessary for me to bring up when we're having a deficit early on in the quarter so we can get in front of it, because I know in month 3, he's going to be focused on closing business and I have no hope. So there's this real balance there where he's pushing me to be better about those short-term strategies and making sure his team is fed enough. And I'm pushing him to focus and push his team to follow up on what we're providing so we have enough pipeline in the future.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk about, for smaller organizations, oftentimes we're involved at the marketing leadership level, VP and above, for board meetings, where we're talking about the who, the what, the how, the when, the where. And I want to talk about how we can, as a small business, medium-sized business, and certainly at the large Fortune 100, the CMOs and the CROs or CSOs are involved in this conversation in preparation for what's happening to the board. How can both teams prepare for board discussions, particularly during a down quarter, which is what we're seeing in the market right now, pretty much globally, and especially with the looming challenges of SVB Bank, Silicon Valley Bank,
Yep.
and the fact that there's worry whether or not they're even going to be around tomorrow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But before you answer that question, we're going to listen to this message from our program sponsor.
Korn Ferry understands talent, and in the sales world, it's no different. Korn Ferry transforms sales teams using their world-class Miller-Hyman methodology, employee assessments, benchmarking, and talent advisor capabilities to increase win rates and quota attainment. Korn Ferry offers Korn Ferry Sell, a sales effectiveness app available in AppExchange and AppSource that helps your sales team develop and replicate powerful sales strategies that help sellers win more deals and crush their quotas. Learn more at kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. That's kornferry.com/sales effectiveness.
Okay, right before that break, I was talking about how to better prepare for these higher level executive meetings. I think you've got some insights on that, and I'd love you to share that.
Yeah, I even run courses on it because it's such a gap in the marketing world, understanding what people are looking for. So this is going to vary based on whether you're venture-backed, private equity. Private equity usually comes to the table with a long list of metrics that they want to see on a monthly and quarterly basis. Venture-backed, it's a little more loosey-goosey, and I see way too many marketers focusing on initiatives versus KPIs that you need to continuously track quarter over quarter so you can show trends. That's so important. And I think when we have that focus on initiatives, I know that's what marketers are focused on to help drive things down the funnel. But how you need to think about it is if I'm reporting on those top line metrics, I use what I know about the initiatives to speak to how we hit those numbers. So be consistent, always focus on the same things. And then when you start identifying an issue or think something's wrong, the first thing you should do is go talk to your business partner, your other executive partner in crime. There's a phrase I heard early on in my career that I live by is no one should be surprised on the executive team in the boardroom, ever. So if you can, even better, start looking at the numbers in the beginning of the quarter, get in front of the problem and collaborate with your teammate on how you're going to make things better. You have a much better story to tell to the board. You come as a united front. And when you talk to those KPIs and why you missed and why you didn't miss, everybody's nodding their head instead of disagreeing. So tying out on which metrics, being consistent across the company on the sort of KPIs that you use, and then communicating to your partners in crime to make sure everybody's singing the same song.
Got it. Okay, so communicate. Let's drill down a couple levels on that.
Sure.
Communicate on what, right? Let's drill down. Of course, KPIs, but what KPIs? How are you preparing for these things?
Yeah,
especially in a down quarter.
So I use the same metrics quarter over quarter, whether we're up or down. I may layer in a couple things depending on where I'm seeing the issues. So I'm always talking about overall engagement, lead volume, pipeline, and bookings. And we're talking about marketing share of pipeline and bookings using a multi-touch model we all agreed upon before we even get to the meeting. I'm also ensuring that those numbers tie out exactly with what sales is reporting, because I have seen way too many marketers report a different number, and then the conversation comes, instead of focusing on what went right and wrong, you're focused on who's right and wrong, and that just damages credibility. So first point of conversation is, do my numbers tie out with the sales team and with finance? If they don't, at least you got in front of it faster. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is when we use multi-touch attribution, marketing share of pipeline and bookings, I'm going to be socializing that with the sales management team early on to make sure that we're in agreement. So if they don't feel the numbers right, that's just as bad as the numbers being wrong. So we need to make sure there's agreement there. It feels good. We're going to sing the same song. And then finally, if we miss in a quarter and I identify an issue with the conversion rates, the first person I'm going to meet with is the sales team. to figure out, like, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I fixed on the marketing side, here's what we're continuing to do, here's what I need you guys to do. Does this sound right? Does this sound achievable? So if you can align on your get well plan before the meeting ever happens, you're just going to be better off, and the board's going to appreciate that. Like, be savvy, know your numbers, and know what you did right and wrong, and what you're going to do next time to avoid what went wrong.
Roger that. Okay. So where does revenue operations, sales enablement, revenue enablement, however you want to call it, where do they fit into this whole entire, puzzle that we just talked about?
Oh, so if you're big enough to be lucky enough to have these functions, and I'm laughing because I am those functions today at Caliber Mind, revenue operations should be the people who are, it's such an important role because they should be testing the waters throughout the quarter and figuring out iceberg ahead, right? So they should be identifying, oh, this doesn't look normal, and we need to dig into it more. And they need to be the ones who are communicating with finance and sales to make sure all the numbers are tying out. You're using the same data definitions, you're marching to the same beat, and those teams know what's going on too. Because if those teams know what's wrong, they can independently start to work on correcting their side of the house, right? So sales enablement is so critical. If we see a problem with conversion rates, marketing has done what they're supposed to do to fix targeting, messaging, and they've got the right mix in there. And we're just seeing, one time I saw 12% of leads were followed up in the same day, and these were highly gated leads. That's a problem. So we need to work with sales enablement to sell them on why following up with leads is an easier path than cold prospecting. And it seems really straightforward, but when you're dealing with a lot of people straight out of college, they may not know any better. Then you need to identify the successes they have, and this is on sales enablement, and then you need to socialize that with the rest of the team. So you're continuously telling this positive story about why we do this thing, why this thing makes sense, because you can't assume that this is common sense to everyone. So hopefully that was what you were looking for.
I love your thoughts there on revenue enablement. Thank you so much for sharing some of those details. They're good insights. So if anybody wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do that? Is that LinkedIn, Twitter? You tell me.
Yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn. So that's probably your best bet. TikTok is too much of a pastime for me right now, so I need to cut back on that. But you're probably best off contacting me on LinkedIn or at calibermind.com.
Fantastic. And as always, I always ask this very special question to all of our guests, and that is, what is your all-time favorite movie?
Oh, well, I don't know what this says about me, but National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. It's just...
That's a good one. I love it. I love it. Fantastic. That was a classic when we were growing up, for sure. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Camela, for joining us here on the Modern Selling Podcast. And for all of you listening in right now, hey, don't turn that dial just quite yet. Listen to this very important message.
Korn Ferry sales effectiveness solutions are increasing win rates by over 20%. Find out how they can help your sales team. Visit kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. That's kornferry.com/sales effectiveness. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.